Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Gwynn here. Today we're going to be reviewing how to set up tables of equivalent ratios. Now just as a quick review here, we have, just as a review of ratios, we'll do a little bit of blue and red in honor of the BYU-Utah game this upcoming weekend. But we have ratios that we can write with a colon, we can write it where it looks like a fraction, and we can write it using the word 2. You could also write it out in words. For every 3 stars there are 2 circles, or for every 3 boys there are 2 girls, for every 3 horses there are 2 trainers, anything like that. They all mean the same thing, they just look a little bit. Now equivalent ratios, if we go back to some of our original work here, the 3 to 2. I like writing it as a fraction for equivalent ratios. It's just easier for me. Some people like to write it as a colon or using the word 2. It really doesn't matter. But equivalent ratios, they're what we call proportional. And that means that as you add more and more and more of those things, groups of that size ratio, that you can always boil it down to the original ratio. So, for example, if I had 3 plus signs and 2 subtraction signs or minus signs, that if I doubled that group, or if I multiplied by 2, for instance, that I'm just doubling that group. I'm keeping it proportional. I add another group here of 3 more plus signs and 2 more minus signs, which tells me then, as I rewrite my original ratio as an equivalent ratio, that I now have 6 plus signs and 1, 2, 3, 4 minus signs. Or my new ratio, which is equivalent to the original ratio, is 6 to 4. And remember, with the picture, you can always go back and boil it down. You can start circling groups of the original ratio, 3 plus signs for every 2 minus signs, 3 plus signs for every 2 minus signs, and if it's equivalent, you won't have anything left over, or you won't have uneven groups. Now we've also talked about equivalent ratios, and when we found unit rates, I mean, we really were just finding an equivalent ratio, right? Either dividing or multiplying by the same thing on the top and bottom, or dividing our ratio by the same, each part of the ratio by the same number, multiplying or dividing. That's really all we can do to keep it proportional. So what we're going to do here, we're going to start off by taking a look at what our problem is. The problem says Hank owns a lawn mowing business. At the end of a Saturday, he realizes that he mowed 24 lawns in 8 hours. At this rate, how many lawns could he mow in 6 hours? What is his rate per hour? So first of all, what I see 2 separate questions here. I see how many lawns could he mow in 6 hours, and I also see what is his rate per hour. Now remember, when it says per hour, it's really just asking 1 hour, even though you don't see that digit 1. I also see in this wordy problem here that the problem gives me some information, and that is that Hank mowed 24 lawns in 8 hours. So as I set up my table of equivalent ratios here, I first need to look at what 2 things I'm comparing, and that is lawns and hours. So I'm going to write that in here, lawns. I know it's not the best handwriting with this little stylus. Lawns and hours. And I'm just going to go ahead and plug in the information they give me, first of all, which is 24 lawns in the lawns column, you can see, and 8 hours. I also know that I need to find how many lawns he can mow in 6 hours, and per hour just means 1. So in order to find this, I'm going to use one of my tools, and I like the tape diagram, so I'm going to start with that one. Starting over here, whether you use a double number line or a tape diagram, they always start at 0, and then the other end over here is simply my ratio that they gave me, which is 24 lawns for every 8 hours. So I'm going to do lawns up here. I'm going to do an L for lawn and an H for hours. 24 and 8. Now I need to get the hours to 1. I like to find the unit rate first because it's way easier to multiply after you found 1. So in order to get to 1, the first thing I can do as I look over here at my top hours, I want to get the hours to 1, I can take half of 8. That works really nicely. Or divide 8 by 2. Same thing. And if I do that, I get 4 hours. Half of 8 hours is 4 hours. And I also have to take half on the top. Half of 24 lawns is 12 lawns. We can take that in half again because 4 breaks up really nicely into 2 groups. Half of 4 is 2 hours. And half of 12 lawns is 6 lawns. And I can keep going until I get to 1. Because I have 2 hours here, I can break it up into 2 groups. If I had 3 hours, I could break it up into 3 hours, or 5 hours, I could break it up into 5. Really, I could have broken this 8 up into 8 groups. That's essentially what I'm doing, slowly. So, if I take half of those 2 hours, I get 1 hour. Half of the 6 lawns is 3 lawns. So, I know that in 1 hour, I can mow 3 lawns, or Hank can mow 3 lawns. I'm going to put that in right here. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of my tape diagram here. And that is, so 1 hour, 3 lawns, 2 hours, 6 lawns, 3 hours, remember I'm going up by 3 because every lawn takes, every hour I can mow 3 lawns. So after 3 hours I've mowed 9. After 4 hours I've mowed 12. After 5 hours, 15, 6 hours, 18, and I might as well fill in that 7 hours, which is 21, and of course I know that 8 hours gives me 24 lawns. So I can go in here, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour, 5 hour, 6 hours, 18 lawns have been mowed. That would be quite a Saturday. Okay. And I know that I'm not totally done yet because I have all of my work shown, but I don't actually have a final answer. And remember, we have 2 questions. How many lawns could he mow in 6 hours, and what is his rate per hour? So I need to make sure that I write that. I'm going to switch colors here. And I'm going to write over here 18 lawns in 6 hours, and that's an answer. I can circle that. And I'm going to write the unit rate using the word per, 3 lawns per hour. And so if I want to talk about ratios then, my original ratio, and I'm going to change the page here, for every 8 hours. And for 6 hours, I found that it was 18 lawns for every 6 hours. And I also found that I could mow 3 lawns per hour. Now, if I look at my unit rate here, and I also look at this ratio and this ratio, I can see that to get from my unit rate to this ratio, all I did was multiply by 6. 3 times 6 equals 18, and 1 times 6 equals 6. So those two are equivalent. And if I go over here, 3 times 8 equals 24, and 1 times 8 equals 8. So I'm multiplying by the same thing on the top and bottom, which means that they are equivalent to the 3 to 1.